Hi, this is a quick tutorial on how to create a IoT function in Maximo Asset Monitor. I will be taking you through a tutorial to do that. Functions allow you to, for example, calculate anomalies or, for example, do a simple calculation. Let's say I wanted to figure out the number of moles, right? I could code this as a function inside of Maximo Asset Monitor. You would use the existing values for pressure and volume and temperature and use a constant R. So here's an example. I have an asset type called clients that's measuring pressure already and also measuring temperature. And I can assume that maybe one of these other ones are, I can make it into volume. But you come over here, this is over here, these are the time series data that are available. So you can see that I do have pressure as a metric that I'm measuring right here. And it has the values. I can also go and find the temperature in here as well. So these will be the values that I use in my function to calculate the number of moles. So the way you would add a function and where we're going to end up publishing it is in the catalog. You can get to the catalog by clicking create and then search for your function. So if I wanted to search for anomaly models, for example, I could see the anomaly model functions that are there. So we're going to add a function here for calculating moles, and right now there is no function for moles, so we'll show you how to do that. To get started, you want to use the tutorial for creating functions. You come over here to documentation. Under documentation, you want to come down to tutorials analytics, and there's a tutorial on creating a custom function, and it steps you through the steps for creating a function. So let's do that. What we're going to do is check our Python version. I've already installed Python 3 and I've created a virtual environment. You can check the internet on how to do that. So I'm going to invoke my virtual environment by changing into the directory and then activating it and then checking the Python version. So I can open up a terminal window like I have here, cd into my virtual environment, and then I can invoke source activate to activate my virtual environment. And you notice here now it says I've activated it. I'm in the fun virtual environment. To check the Python version, you can type python-version once you've opened up your virtual environment. So now we'll just type python-version. Okay. And you can see here I'm using Python version 3.6.5. Clicking over here on this link. Download it. Download the community edition. Save it to the local file. Once it's done downloading, you can open the file. Drag it to your applications to install it. And then you can double click on it to launch it. So after you download PyCharm, you're going to want to set up a virtual environment so you can follow directions on that. I'm going to actually instead use Atom because that's the IDE, the integrated development environment that I like using because I also do JavaScript. So I'll show you how to go through that. So if we go back to the steps, you can see here we've have Python, we have PyCharm, our favorite IDE installed. Next, we want to clone the starter package. So if you click on that, it takes you to an external website, which is the IoT functions that you can clone and copy. You'll get the URL here. So you can just copy this. And what we're going to do is, before we copy it, we're going to actually, you need to have Git installed. We're going to make a directory. So we're going to cd out of our bin directory where we just created our virtual environment. And then we're going to make a new project directory. Cd into our project. And then we're going to go ahead and clone the repository. Sorry. Then we're going to cd into the functions. Then do a git status. Then you can get your present working directory. And then what you want to do is you want to set your Python path to that directory. So we've set the Python path. Now what we want to do is we want to install our dependencies for Python. So you can just select this and go to your window. And this will install all the dependencies. And in this case, I'm already updated because I previously installed the dependencies. You have our data scientist come up with this formula, distance times factor. We could do something simple like, change our formula to be, pressure times temperature or something, right? Which we have both of those. So that'll be our formula. And the other thing we'll do is we'll verify our package is set up correctly. It should have this format. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to use Atom. I'm going to open up our project folder. It's under functions, right? Oh, actually, it was here, documents, workspace, IoT, functions, project functions. Project, and then we have our functions. And here is our structure. We have, this is where we're going to do most of our coding. We're going to create our own function instead of the one that's here, and we're going to modify the code that's here. There's really two methods that we're going to implement. One is the execute method, where we do our calculations, and the other one is the UI, where we want to modify the inputs and outputs that can be arguments for our function. So these will be the two places that we'll be modifying this function, which is the template. Next, we're going to follow the steps here to modify the names of our functions so that they don't clash or conflict with functions that other folks have deployed and published in the catalog. So the first name is changing the module name instead of using custom. So we're going to come up here. So we're going to rename this to custom Carlos. Then we're also going to rename the setup file to also refer to the name. So we'll come over here to setup.py and change that to custom Carlos as well. Function name to reflect what we want the function to be. So we go back here and we're going to change the class name here to find in project. And instead of hello world, we're going to call it press times temp. Press temp. And then we'll do replace all. And you can see here it's going to replace it in the test function that we have, but also we'll replace it in our custom function as well. So you can see here now that our class name is going to be called press temp to do the multiplication instead. When we rename these, both the module name and also the actual function name, we want to make sure that the local test function that allows us to run the functions locally will be able to resolve and find those. So you notice here this still makes reference to press temp, but it makes reference to custom, and we changed the name to custom Carlos. So you just gotta make sure you correct your import statements as well. We've renamed our class. The next step here says you actually have to change the functions.py file, this function here, but you don't have to. You can leave that the way it is. What you do have to change is this module name path. You also need to, once we push this to our GitHub, you'll also have to modify this GitHub URL, which is right here. Right now it points to this one. We'll replace this with wherever we end up pushing our code to. So that we'll do that a little bit later. But before that, we want to actually get our credentials and reference them. So there is a file that actually already is in here or referenced in here to extract the credentials in our test function. So when we test this, we want to pull the credentials to access the service. So we want to create a file, which is a credentials file. Come over here to usage, and then go over here to the platform analytics service. And you can just copy this to the clipboard, and then you can come over and in your functions directory, create a new file, and then paste it and save it. And if you want to just save it with a name, you can just name it the name that's already in the code inside of your test function. So then you can just say save. And then you can give it a name, that name, in the functions directory, and that's it. Okay, so at this point, we want to push our changes to the GitHub repository, but what we've done is we've actually cloned the existing samples, right? The template that we provide in the doc. So that's pointing to a different GitHub repo. So if, for example, we say git status, we can see what are the files that we've modified so far. And then if I look and check where, if for example, I wanted to do a git add on one of these files, git add, and then git commit, and then if I do try to do a git push, it's still pointing to where I forked this from. So I can check that by saying git. And then you can see here, it's both the fetch and the push are going to where I forked from. So I need to change that. And to change that, Google on how to push an existing repo to a different repo server, you'll see the steps there on how to do that. So we can go ahead and create a new repo at GitHub. So here's my GitHub account, and we can go to repositories. And then create a new repo. And we'll just call this make it public, and we won't initialize it. Original repo. Now we're gonna rename the original to upstream. And then we're gonna add a remote add origin to our new GitHub, and you can get that by copying this, right? And we'll copy that. And then we can try to do our git push origin master now. And you notice it was able to push those. And now if we go and look to see if it pushed the change to setup.py, right? That was what we pushed in. Refresh this. And you can see it just updated it 5 minutes ago. And you can see our function is there. Our code to point to our own GitHub repo. And we can come over here and copy this, the GitHub URL. And if you recall, in one of the tutorial steps, it suggested that you rename your GitHub in your function. So there, right now it points to the template, and you want to change that to point to yours. So we would go into our function, and we'd want to change that from what's there into our own function and save that. Okay, so now we want to test our function locally. As I mentioned earlier, there is a local test of function script that will invoke our script. And right now the function is going to invoke our execute method inside of our functions and simply return the inputs and outputs. In this case, if you pass in a name, it'll actually send back the name of the person. And in this case, the name that we're inputting is Mike, and the greeting column name is greeting. So to run this, we can just make sure that we're in our functions directory that we created earlier. We're going to go ahead and just invoke our Python function that's there in terms of the path. So we'll come over here, Control V. And if you have a problem with your credentials, immediately you'll get some errors with that if there's connection problems. So it's taking our JSON API, JSON credentials file and calling the remote Maximo Monitor analytics service, and it is actually doing some debug statements here. You can actually see it's generating, for example, the data based on my hello world. And it says if it runs correctly, you'll see a 200 success. So the request actually was successful. The other way that you'll see is any output that gets created also gets created locally here. So if you click on the data frame output, it creates a CSV. You can see here the timestamp of when it ran, as well as the values that were passed in. You notice here it says hello Mike. So that way there you can see what the data frame was in terms of the time series data that was created by this hello world function, which puts a value of hello Mike into our repository. So that's how you test a function locally. Before we make any other changes to our function, for example, to actually do the multiplication of pressure times temperature, we probably want to first just make sure that the function can be published and registered in the catalog. So let's do that first. And the way you do that is you invoke the register command that you see here in your script. So you can add it either in your local test to also register it, or you can create a separate script as well. So let's go back. So in our local test, we can register the function. You can see here it's already actually been registered, so we don't even have to add that code in. So to see if it's been registered, what we can do is we can go into the catalog and see if we see a press temp function in there. So we can go into our entity type, go to data, we can see our metrics from before, come over here to see, into our catalog to see if we can find our function. If we recall, we called it press temp. And there it is. Select it. And then you notice here it's asking us for the name. In this case, we want to add Carlos as the name. And then the output will be a new column called greeting column. And you can see it adds the column here. And then what happens is the function is going to start calculating every time it's run. And you can configure how often it's run by, on this screen, clicking the schedule button and scheduling the frequency. So this will be run every 5 minutes to calculate a greeting. In our case, we're going to change it to do a pressure times temperature calculation. You can also set how far back it goes in terms of days. So we want to go back and look at the last hour, and then we can update it. So that's how you confirm that your function is now getting published into the catalog.